So what we have now is we have our first live interview of the year, actually. Is that right, Alyssa?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we have Maria Mursch on the phone. Maria Mursch graduated from the School of Social Welfare here at the University of Albany in 2012, where she participated in the Hartford Partnership Program for Aging Education. She's now manager of the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Early Stage Center at CaringKind, the heart of Alzheimer's caregiving, which is formerly known as the Alzheimer's Association in the New York City chapter. In her role, Maria provides counseling and facilitates various groups for people who have a diagnosis of early stage Alzheimer's or a related dementia, as well as the fact that Maria provides support to their care partners. Ms. Mursch also teaches a dementia course at the Columbia University School of Social Work. Over the last 2 years, she has facilitated 2 different pilot improv groups for people with early stage dementia, and we would like to welcome her to the show. Welcome, Maria. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you for having me.
Great. We're glad you're here on the show virtually via telephone.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I just wanted to, kind of jump right in because this is a topic that is a lot of people think about dementia and Alzheimer's. And I just know, I have some elderly neighbors and family members and everyone. There's always this sort of fear of, when I get older, will I develop this? And, what are the signs and symptoms? And there's sometimes anxiety as you get older as to, what causes this and what should I be looking for? And what can I do to maybe prevent it or decrease my likelihood of getting this? So what are some of the early stages of Alzheimer's or dementia? What are some of the symptoms that people should know about?
Yes, and I agree with you. I think, this is one of the most feared illnesses, if not the most feared illnesses. And so it's a big hot topic these days. And when we're talking about dementia, I'll begin with defining what dementia is and then talking a little bit about the symptoms of early stage.
That would be great.
Yeah, and so when we talk about dementia, it's really characterized by the loss of cognitive functioning, which means thinking, memory, reasoning, and behavioral abilities, such that it really interferes with a person's daily life and activities. So dementia really ranges in severity from the mildest stage, when it's just beginning to affect a person's functioning, to the most severe stage, when the person is really reliant on others for basic activities of daily living. And when we talk about dementia, it's really an umbrella term, meaning that underlying medical conditions are what characterize or cause dementia. And Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia, but of course you've got other different kinds of dementias underneath that umbrella. Mm-hmm. Okay. So when we talk about early stage dementia, we might be talking about Alzheimer's disease, but it could be a related dementia. But typically, you see some of the similar symptoms. So usually what's very common in the early stage is word-finding difficulties, vision or spatial issues, impaired reasoning or judgment. Those are all signs of early dementia. And then there are other things that come up for people, so wandering or getting lost. I would have to say in the early stage, a person can still live on their own, but they might start to experience getting disoriented as they're traveling. Maybe they're still driving and they don't recognize a certain street, or if they have to go an alternative route, that might get confusing for them. There could be trouble handling money and paying bills, often a first sign for family members if a person was really on top of that. Repeating questions, we see that often because of the short-term memory and taking longer to complete normal tasks, daily tasks that they were once familiar with, losing things, misplacing items, and there may even be personality or behavioral changes. Maybe there's increased frustration that a person didn't used to exhibit. So that all of those symptoms really compose the early stage of dementia, regardless of exactly what the diagnosis is. Those are things to really look for.
Sure.
Now, is it a combination, or people forget things sometimes, and that might be, people, as you age, sometimes is it normal just to forget, or is it a combination of with all of these kind of other things too that pieces it together, saying, hey, maybe I should be talking to my doctor more about, maybe this is beyond the simple, oh, I forgot where I put my car keys, or I forgot where I put those documents, where did I keep them again? Is it a combination of several factors, or is just one of those things enough to say, maybe I should talk to someone and see what's going on?
Right, of course. That's a great question. And just to be clear too, our memories do start to forget a little as we age. So there's certainly normal aging where maybe we're not as sharp as we used to be. But when we talk about dementia, it is really all of these collections of symptoms. And what we've usually noticed with particularly Alzheimer's disease is it's usually the short-term memory, and that's because of what's going on pathologically in the brain, where we start to see the buildup of proteins it's really an accumulation of proteins that are affecting the hippocampus region of the brain, which is responsible for the short-term memory, and then the disease, if you will, sort of travels to other regions of the brain slowly over time. So with Alzheimer's in particular, you might not see so much of these other symptoms at first. You might see just the short-term memory, but all of those symptoms described are what characterize dementia. It just sort of may not be apparent early on that these are other symptoms or signs. And of course, everyone is different with this diagnosis. Mm-hmm. It could range from person to person in terms of what they're experiencing.
Yeah. So what kinds of issues does this population face? I mean, is there a stigma attached to this, or is it more of anxiety or fear from family members of, what should I expect? What are some of the things that, family and even the person going through this is experiencing?
Yeah. So of course, there's still this stigma, which I think has gotten better over time, but people still do face difficulty, I think, in talking about it and in coming out and talking to other people about it. I think there's a fear around being a burden to other people. There may be a fear of being taken advantage of by other people. And this can be really isolating. And so people sometimes don't talk about it or don't go to the doctor, which could be because there's some denial there that something is wrong. They might think it's normal aging, and it's really more than that. And as a result of all of this, people, again, are isolated, and also they may lose this window of opportunity to actually talk about the diagnosis, process it emotionally, and plan for their future. Because as we know with dementia, any kind of dementia, there's this window of time where a person can still make decisions, which is referring to the early stage. But as the disease progresses, they will lose the insight that they once had, and will lose the ability or capacity to make major decisions. So I think that in some ways it can often feel like a death sentence to people. And again, it's such a feared diagnosis that it has people becoming isolated for that reason.
Well, it sounds like very important work that you're doing down there in New York City. How did you get interested in this particular area of social work?
Yeah, I have a relative. My grandmother had Alzheimer's disease, and when I was participating in the Hartford program there at Albany, I also had a part-time job taking care or being a companion of a woman who was living in a nursing home in that area. And I really sort of just fell in love with the population. I felt like I had a knack for it. I was really good at going with the flow, and the woman I was taking care of never knew who I was. She never recognized me. So every day I went there, I just played the part of whoever she thought I was, whether that was a friend, a family member, and I realized how much patience I had, and I thought, I just need to stay in this field and learn as much as I can. And after school, I had relocated to New York City, and here I am working for really the leader in CaringKind, is the leader organization in terms of this work in New York City, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a lot of services, I'm guessing, that you offer, because I just remember going back to 1999, 2001, when my great-grandmother was starting to really show signs of this. And I don't think we were as informed as we should have been, like what was going on. She was 93 at the time. Maybe it was just normal aging, but the forgetfulness, she was still trying to live at home, a few blocks away from us, but forgetting to, with the stove and getting confused with the TV and how to use her phone. And there was just things that my family was trying to step in, but we weren't really connected with any services. We didn't really know what to do. We were just trying to do it on our own, with everyone taking shifts, going over there, helping. We had that little thing that she could push if she fell or something. Mm-hmm. But she was confused with that. She was like, "Who is this voice talking?" And she would get confused as well if she would press the button.
Right.
So what services now? How has, these past 15 years, what changes have there been and improvements to help individuals, and what does your agency do to assist families and individuals in, not deteriorating?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I have to say that we still have a long way to go, but I think in the last 15 years or so, there has been more developments. People are living longer, so we see a huge increase in this diagnosis. We also have the baby boomer population. So more and more people, more and more families are affected by this. I think at this point, everyone probably knows somebody who has the diagnosis. Mm-hmm. And so there's been more funds allocated for this type of work. Governor Cuomo had allocated funds recently, and we now have grants through the Department of Health that have really been a part of services in New York State more recently. And CaringKind, which again, we were part of the Alzheimer's Association up until about a year ago. We have been around for a very long time, and our early stage services were developed in the early 90s, where we started having a early stage support group. So that was the first time I think it was really recognized, or maybe not recognized, but there was finally resources to start creating services for the people who we don't hear from very often, and that's the people who actually have the diagnosis. A lot, and I think this is still true today, a lot of the services out there are more for caregivers, which is absolutely necessary, but there's also that other piece, which is helping the people who actually get the diagnosis receive the support that they need just as much.
Sure. So speaking of that support, tell us a little bit about this improv intervention and exactly what that idea is. Tell us, and some of our listeners may be familiar with social work interventions and group interventions, and some may just be community members who are listening for the first time and hearing you. So maybe explain to us a little bit what improv is and how that works into the idea of working with people who have early dementia.
Yeah, so improv is really defined as sort of executing or arranging anything without preparation. So there's no plan in place. People are typically most familiar with this concept if they've watched the show Whose Line Is It Anyway? Which I believe is still on the air, where there may be sort of a recommendation from the audience, and the actors or the improvisers just sort of act based on this one concept or this one idea. Or maybe they're given a flotation device and they have to think of all these different ways that they could use the flotation device.
Right.
And so when I think of improv, I do think of that show, and then I also think that there's much more to it. So there are plenty of professionals out there that use improv to become better at public speaking, to become more comfortable with themselves. I co-facilitated this group with a professional improviser, Johnna Scrabis, and Johnna says that she's always had attorneys come to her as part of as part of their own training, so to speak. They've joined to get better at really speaking and listening, because a lot of improvisation is listening to whatever is going on in the room and acting quickly and being confident in that, which takes time, of course. So that's what improv really is. And I started to get involved because I went to an improv show, simply enough, in my own personal time. And as I was watching it, I started to a light bulb went off in my head, and I started to think about how this doesn't really require much memory, and people with early memory loss or early dementia could probably really do this. And then furthermore, they're already improvising throughout their day. That's one thing that our clients really talk about, how they have to keep up with the rest of the world. And so they are continuously improvising. Maybe they don't recall a person's name, but they have to think on their feet and be able to engage in that conversation with a person. And so I also felt that improv was and is a parallel process when it comes to the disease process. So just as in improv, where you don't necessarily know what's going to happen, that's very similar to how this disease plays out. It's very difficult to predict what types of symptoms you will have, and although we have a general sense of the stages of the illness, it's still unpredictable in the day-to-day things that can come up for someone. So lo and behold, I thought, I wonder what it would be like if we had a program where people who are doing this, that speaks to their strengths, are doing this day in and day out, can be in a space with other people who are experiencing something similar to them. They're actually in a place where there's no term no, that they can say yes. In fact, that's the sort of the root of improv, that you're saying yes to everything that comes your way, and you're working with that, and you're supporting it with whatever comes to your mind. And so for people who are often told no throughout the day, no, you can't arrange your medications, your daughter does that for you now, no, you can't go to the bank, your son or your spouse is now managing all of your finances. This is a place that people can come and there's no wrong. And that for me was sort of the basis of trying to create a program like this.
Well, it seems like it hits so many different areas, just that, even that one, how that you just said, that last part of where they can come and they can sort of have control a little bit. They can make decisions, and there is no right and wrong for this. They can do things there. It just seems like it hits a lot of different areas for working with the person, that whole individual person, and where they are at the time.
Right.
Are there certain things that we can do beforehand? I mean, I just think, I have a 4-year-old, and I just think of all the things that I do with her every day to help her learn. And as are things that we should be doing as we're getting older that can help us, I don't want to say, I don't know if we'll prevent, dementia, but are there things that we can do and as we age to help us keep our mind sharp in a way, and to, help, I guess, get to that point where our memory is maybe stronger, or are there things to prevent, or is it just sort of if it happens, it happens?
Yeah, I get that question quite often, and I think what I tell people is that there are things that we can try to do, which is staying socially active, keeping up with routines that you have, exercise and diet, sort of the things you hear in terms of how to prevent really any illnesses, right? These things are helpful regardless. But at the same time, I don't want there to be any misinformation out there that there is a sure and fast way to prevent the illness, because we certainly see people who have lived very healthy lives where they have been physically active, are eating right, they're socially involved, and they still get this illness. So in that sense, the disease doesn't really discriminate. Yeah. Okay. But in order to, I think, give it our best shot, those are some of the things that we would recommend.
Now, before we talk a little bit more about the improv, because I'm really interested in that, I just have one more question. You might not know the answer to this, but when you just said something about keeping the socially involved connection with other people in the age of technology, where people's families live across to the United States, across the world. There's a lot of computer use in texting and all of this. Have you seen an impact in with people with dementia or Alzheimer's when it is that connection is not really there like it might have used to been before technology really kind of took over in the means of communication and how to be socially engaged with others? Yeah, that's definitely an interesting question. Well, I have to say that, and I don't think I do have an answer for it, but I think that we're on sort of the cusp of a change in how this population may be affected, because right now I think that our elders currently are still the folks who they might be tech savvy and they use things, but these are still, I think, the folks who have not totally, they're not accustomed to constant texting and constant social media. So for our clients currently, I don't know if that's a factor for them, but I do wonder, as we age, as the generations that are younger than that age, how will this affect us? And maybe only time will tell. Are we socializing less than we were, and how will this affect our cognition as we age? I think is a really great question, and I don't know if there are any studies that are starting to explore that. Okay, Eric, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, this is where do you see your work headed next? What's the it sounds like you've been working with this population for a couple years now. You've been developing an expertise, and you've certainly been learning about what works and maybe what doesn't work as well. Where do you see this all heading for you?
Yeah, well, we're going to continue to run and facilitate the groups that we always have. So just to go back a moment, we have a lot of different services here, and all of them are, the goal is to help people socialize and help keep them active in that area. Unfortunately, we don't have anything that makes the memory better. We don't have a cure. This is a fatal condition, which some people don't quite realize or understand, but if it truly played its course, this is a disease that really does drastically affect a person's life because of that. And so we want to maintain our space, our center, which was created in 2013, in terms of the place for people with early dementia, where they can go and they don't have to keep up with the rest of the world. And so the other services that we have will continue here. As far as improv goes, it's hard to say, because we had two pilots Pilot 1 had about 10 people, and Pilot 2 had about half of that. And we realized that we probably have to hone in on recruiting skills, making the group itself on a day that our clients can most likely participate, and there's more, I'd say, structural or internal structural things that we have to work on to keep improv going. And the other part of that is really that we can't do it ourselves. So we ended up partnering with a professional improviser because we realized that there are currently now 3 social workers on staff in the center, but it is entirely too much to have a curriculum and then tweak that to match what the clients can do, and really keep working at the curriculum to make sure that they will be successful each time.
Mm-hmm. But it's so individualized with the individuals, like you said. It's everyone has their own different symptoms and where they are in that whole process. So when you're making a curriculum, it can be kind of hard to sort of generalize and say like this is going to be perfect for everyone when everyone is sort of at different stages. Exactly.
And so although it is definitely doable and it's feasible, it just requires, I think, a team approach. And so I think if we are to bring it back, we will definitely need our consultant to come back. But we don't have the funds to have a consultant throughout the entire year. So it may be something that has to go on for maybe 5 or 6 weeks. Throughout the year, maybe it's a biannual thing that we do, and those are all definitely good things. It would be great if we could have an ongoing group. In fact, this does exist out at Northwestern University, where I had actually sort of got the idea from when I looked into it myself to see if there was actually any research on this. And so I believe they have an ongoing group, and they also have ongoing clients because there's a clinic there. So in terms of referrals, they get them very frequently, unlike us where it's sort of we certainly get referrals, but we're not attached to a medical provider. So referrals can be sort of few and far between, and a person may not be interested in improv.
Sure.
And people might not always know. Sometimes I feel like people just think this is part of aging, and it's not. Dementia, like as you said, it's separate than just the simple forgetfulness and things like that. So, I think just the awareness itself about what Alzheimer's, dementia, what that is, and how there are early signs and symptoms that you can notice that are separate. You can't just dismiss them as, oh, this person's just getting old. This is normal for anyone to have at this age. So I think that awareness that you're doing even right now, giving us information about Alzheimer's, dementia, what are these early stages and warning signs, can help people to say, hey, maybe I do need a referral to, something like this to help me.
Yeah, and on that note too, just to also provide some further information, there are lots of things out there that may not be dementia but look like dementia. For example, a person could possibly have a vitamin deficiency, or they could have a brain tumor, and that could look a lot like dementia or Alzheimer's disease. And so what we often tell people, because there's a ton of people who fall into that worried well category, we often tell people to certainly go to your doctor, maybe you start with your primary care physician. There's a series of tests that they will do, which we call a full workup, to differentiate between some of these other conditions that people could have that look a lot like an Alzheimer's type dementia.
Yeah, and there must be that family and for even neighborhood support system must be really critical, and for people to have those relationships, because if you're by yourself and you're not always going to notice the signs maybe and symptoms of you changing, your behavior, other people sometimes pick up on that and let you be aware of it, at times. So I think that how you were saying that social support network, that piece of people to have people to communicate with and to have those friendships and bonds and relationships is an important part. It could be an important part in even identifying these early stages, because an individual might not pick up on it themselves with the change within themselves.
Exactly. Yes, it really speaks to how important the social support is when it comes to this. Mm-hmm.
So if you've just tuned in, we're listening to the Social Workers Live Radio Talk Show, and our guest via telephone is Maria Mursch, who works in New York City at the Early Stage Center at CaringKind, which is the heart of Alzheimer's caregiving in New York City. So, Maria, another quick question for you just about the improv intervention. I mean, it seems to me, as someone involved in social work education, that this particular intervention is a really exciting one in the ways that it connects creativity with social work intervention. Do you have any thoughts about sort of how, after you've done this for a couple years, it seems like it potentially uses some different skills than we talk about in social work education with the creativity piece?
Yeah, are you referring to creativity on the social worker's end, or
yes,
creativity on the client end?
Well, certainly, I think both are relevant, but I was thinking more about the intervention end, that for social workers and caregivers, and maybe even for family members, that there is a role for creativity, and that creativity is something that we don't always think about and teach about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to Alzheimer's disease or any related dementia, being creative is sort of what people have to adopt. You are naturally becoming creative, and that's because the person with this illness will eventually lose the strands of reality. They become a part of their own world, and then once they're in that world, we have to get very creative in terms of making sure that world is a safe place for them. We have to agree with them. Otherwise we're essentially calling them liars. So if, for example, if mom, and this is not really an early stage thing, maybe middle stage or later stage, but if mom believes that she's in the house that she was when she was a child, and she's thinking that she was 12, maybe the family has to get very creative with agreeing with that and playing into the story. Because if we try to say, well, mom, this isn't your childhood home. This is the home that you and dad created. I can imagine that is a very scary thing for a person to have to hear, that all of a sudden what they think is reality is not really reality. And so I think that this concept of being creative, it can start in the early stage of this diagnosis and throughout the diagnosis. And I think in terms of other social workers, I think really having to think outside the box is sometimes a part of this work. Mm-hmm. We have to think about, how are people connecting, and how can we continue that relationship with people? That's our main goal, because we know with that relationship we can accomplish so much more. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes it's not through talking. Sometimes it's through acting something out. Sometimes it's through maybe stepping outside of your comfort zone, right, and pretending to be something else in order to achieve greater things.
Thanks for helping us understand that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as we wrap up here, I mean, this has been a great conversation, and it just reminded me of, how important relationships are with individuals. I remember, like I said, when my great-grandmother was going through this, I had years before, back when I was still, in middle school, I had done a project where I recorded her, and she talked about on a cassette tape, and I had interviewed her, and she was telling me all these stories about growing up in, she was born in 1905, and I was hearing all these stories about, her life and her home and her family. And then as she was going through, for this forgetfulness, forgetting things, and this where we didn't know if she was safe in the house, it was so great to be able to, I still had that cassette tape. It was great to go back and sort of re-listen and still not lose those stories and those memories and those things that are part of our family history that only she knew. So I'm glad that there are more resources for families now to be able to help their family members, individuals, not progress so rapidly into a negative or into worse situation, to be able to try to maybe not regain some of that memory, but to not progress in a way that is going to deteriorate them quicker. So that's really the work that you guys are doing is wonderful, because it's very hard for any family, I think, or individual and their family to really lose a person right in front of them, even though they're sitting right there. Are there any resources, as we wrap up, are there any resources that you'd like to leave us, for anyone listening who says, maybe I need to go find some help for me or for a family member? What do you have for us? Or
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the best phone number for people to call, if anyone is listening in or wants to refer people to us in any way, the best phone number to call is our helpline, and that is 646-744-2900. And we are specific to New York City. However, we can connect people to other organizations if they are in the Albany area, or if they just flat out need to talk or need information about this diagnosis. We're happy to help, and we have helpline specialists on the line. So please feel free to share that resource, and for people allowing people to call us at any time.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being our guest, Maria.
Thank you.
Again,
this was Maria Mursch, who is an alum of the University at Albany, graduated in 2012, and she is now working at CaringKind in New York City. So thank you.
And we hope you'll stay in touch, Maria, and let us know how things progress in the next couple of years.
Absolutely. I'd be glad to.
Thanks for giving us a ring.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.